Live now to Washington. Zainab Chaudry is national spokesperson for the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Welcome to you, Zainab. We've seen on the streets, I want to talk about support, and that can be two different things. It can be public support or it can be political support. We've seen protesters out on the streets. We've got live pictures now in Washington, D.C. A lot of people, they are unhappy about the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's there and the way he's been behaving. What about the political reaction? How do you think the US lawmakers are going to react when Netanyahu steps up and speaks in front of Congress?
Yeah, so congressional leadership have invited Mr. Netanyahu to come and address Congress, but they are not speaking for the vast majority of Americans. CARE is deeply troubled by the fact that Maryland's own Senator Ben Cardin has chosen to preside over the hearing in the speaking of a war criminal who's responsible for a brutal genocide and egregious human rights violations that have cost the lives of maybe up to or even over 186,000 civilians in Palestine. Our organization has urged Senator Cardin to step back and to rescind this agreement to preside over this hearing. We are calling on all members of Congress to boycott this address, to not grant legitimacy and not grant a platform to an individual who is facing a warrant for his arrest by the International Criminal Court for his consistent and relentless, brutal genocide of Palestinians in Gaza.
Now, President Biden, there is a camp that says he will now be pushing even harder to get a ceasefire deal. That's supposedly part of the reason Netanyahu's there, for them to try and arrange some kind of ceasefire deal. But there's also the critics who say that Israel couldn't continue to conduct this war in Gaza without US support, without the funding, and without the supply of weapons. How would you assess that accusation?
You know, we need politicians who are genuine and who are honest, who are not speaking out of both sides of their mouths. It's truly absurd and disgraceful that while billions of American tax dollars are being spent to bomb children in Gaza, that now millions of our tax dollars are now being spent to construct fortresses around Capitol Hill to provide security for a war criminal who is guilty of human rights violations of egregious proportions. And the fact that our government, claims that they want to broker a ceasefire deal, but at the same time continue to write a blank check and send more military aid to Israel to continue its bombardment of Palestine in Gaza specifically, but also in the West Bank as well. It just lends itself to incredulity. It makes it very difficult to believe that this administration has any sincere interest in brokering an honest deal. And unfortunately, the faith of the American people, the vast majority of American people who have been calling for a ceasefire for many months now, is no longer in this administration.
Obviously, a lot of people will hope that the conflict's going to be over by the time any kind of presidential election comes around, but we just don't know at this stage if it's still continuing. To what extent do you think this will be a talking point that's put towards the candidates in the build-up to the election?
Well, it's very clear that this is a priority issue for many thousands of Americans, and this is going to translate into how voters vote at the polls on election day, and during early voting. Many Americans care deeply about the fact that billions of our tax dollars have been used to perpetuate the daily human rights violations. Just recently, a doctor from the United States just returned from a mission to Gaza, where he said that in over 40 years of his conducting medical missions, what he saw in 10 days or 1 week in his time in Gaza was worse than all of his medical missions combined. And I think these kind of accounts, they're also just exposing the fact that whatever our government is saying in terms of its intent to want to broker a ceasefire deal, it seems disingenuous, and the American people are tired of it. The vast majority of people who are out marching in Washington, D.C., my organization is supporting this protest today in Washington, D.C. We want to see tangible change. We are demanding an immediate permanent ceasefire. We are demanding an open corridor for humanitarian aid into Gaza, medical aid into Gaza. We want justice for the Palestinian people. That is the only way for safety and security for all people, including Israelis. And we also applaud Senator Van Hollen's decision, as well as nearly 30 other members of Congress who have decided to boycott today's address. They are standing on principle, and they're demonstrating that they are attentive to the voices and the concerns and the priorities of many Americans. And they are not going to be in that chamber when Mr. Netanyahu gives his speech.
Zainab, thanks for your time. We've been hearing the thoughts of Zainab Chaudry. She's national spokesperson for the Council on American-Islamic Relations.